This is the new Zeiss ZX1. This is the new camera from Zeiss, and they were nice enough to send it to us for the best part of a week to test it out, to really get a hands-on feel for it and give it a review as well. And I've been doing just that. I've been out and about with it in this glorious sun that we finally seem to have gotten, which has been great for landscape, for portrait, all kinds of stuff to really try and put this through its paces. Now, there's a lot to talk about with this camera. Obviously, we don't get cameras from Zeiss very often. We see a lot of optics, lenses, scopes, binoculars, stuff like that. But cameras we don't see so often really at all. So this is a very interesting bit of kit, and I've been extremely interested to check this out. Now, of course, let's do some headline spec. Let's talk about exactly what this is. 37.4 megapixel CMOS sensor. So high resolution, not the highest we've ever seen, but high resolution for sure. We've got a 35mm fixed lens on the front here. That's f2 as well. Image quality from that is nice. We're going to get onto that in a bit as well. And then otherwise, we've got this incredibly sleek, minimalist design on the actual camera itself. So it's all black. There's very few buttons and dials, really just the two dials on the top for shutter speed, ISO. We've got the aperture ring on the actual lens. We've got the shutter, and then we've got one button on the back, and the rest is pretty much just all done through touch control on the rear screen. Now, the big thing about this camera is what Zeiss are calling shoot, edit, share. And essentially it has Lightroom and Instagram built into the camera. It runs on Android. So when you boot it up, it's actually a little bit like turning on a phone. It loads up an operating system, and then you can obviously take your photos and do all that kind of stuff, but you can also open Lightroom within the camera, edit your photo, open Instagram, post it straight there and then. So it's designed to be something of an all-in-one for content creators kind of on the go, who are out and about doing things. Now, I've obviously tried that out for a bunch of different photos. I gave it a go when I very first took the camera out of the box, just with a photo in my own garden. But I've been trying it out with a few different sort of landscape and portrait kind of options. I think there's pros and cons to it. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But let's talk about image quality that you get out of the camera first and foremost, and then get on to kind of the bells and whistles like the Lightroom in the camera as well, and talk about that. So image quality, I just want to kind of start there. I've taken a lot of photos with this camera. I think they all look very decent. I think the actual sharpness, the colors, pretty much exactly like I would expect from a Zeiss. They look nice, right? The micro contrast you get with Zeiss is always very nice. The kind of colors you get with Zeiss is always very nice. And that seems to be the case here as well in the actual camera. Now, in terms of ISO and noise and low light and all that kind of stuff, the lens is f2. So you've got a decent amount of light getting in there. You can shoot in lower light without having to worry too much. You can also bump up the ISO. I didn't really have that much of a problem in terms of noise and stuff like that. Of course, f2 is also a nice wide open aperture for portraits as well. It's not as wide open as it could be, but then I don't think that's this kind of camera. It's not an 85mm f1.4, it's a 35mm, and f2 is enough to get a bit of a blur, but you're still going to retain a bit more of an environmental portrait kind of feel. Because of the focal length and because of that f2 aperture and the size of this as well, you could definitely take this around doing street photography, which I did a little bit, not too much, but a little bit out and about, trying to take photos of people, because it's not too in your face. It's not as small as some cameras, and actually it's a little bit bigger than I thought it was going to be, but it's not too bad. It's 35mm, so you can get some nice kind of wide photos, and because of the 37.4 megapixel sensor, you can crop them in a little bit as well without really losing any detail. You can still get some nice sharp images. There is a bit of video which we can talk about as well. There's not a huge amount to talk about here, to be honest. 4K 30 frames a second, full HD 60 frames a second. Video is not the strong point of this camera. I don't think there's any point in pretending it is. It's obviously not a main focus, to be honest. This is obviously aimed definitely at photographers. And with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about Lightroom in the camera and what that's like. Now, before we can talk about Lightroom, we need to talk about the screen on the back. Now, this is actually a decent sized screen, and it's a touch screen, obviously, as well. It would need to be for this kind of stuff. But you are going to be controlling most things from that touch screen. So there's no joystick, there's no kind of D-pad or anything like that. You are controlling almost everything from the touchscreen. And at first, that was a little bit jarring, but actually, it kind of feels a little bit like controlling your phone. It's a very responsive touchscreen, which is good. And you're able to cycle through menus and things like that without any issue. I didn't have, it took me a couple of minutes to get used to it. And then I was away, just changing settings, doing all kinds of stuff. Not a problem. You get used to things like the swiping to open new menus and stuff like that, and to open Lightroom as well, which I never had a problem with kind of any of that stuff. You do have one button on the back, which can be used for a couple of different things, but to be honest, it feels a little bit redundant actually, because there's a limit to what you can set that button to do. And all of the things you can set that button to do are not things that I would want to do with the button. So it feels like it really should have just been a Lightroom button. Like you press that, that's how you go into Lightroom, but it's not. So you know, never mind, I guess. You swipe up to get to Lightroom, and you can get into there and upload your photos into Lightroom. It has to be linked to an Adobe account, of course, so you do still need an account. But once you've linked that up and you're away, you can just upload your photos into Lightroom. There's a 512GB SSD in this camera as well, so you don't need to worry about SD cards or anything like that. You can just shoot away. You can just have the time of your life. And it's nice and quick, the SSD as well. Actually uploading into Lightroom on the camera was nice and quick. It uploaded very quickly and it was straight in for me to be able to edit. Now, I was using my finger to actually try and edit on the back of the screen. I've got pretty big fingers, and I'm not gonna lie to you, that was not the best experience I've ever had. I would imagine using a stylus or something like that would be much, much better, because my finger was just a little bit too big and it just felt a little bit too clunky and a bit too clumsy to do it. And realistically, it's not something that I would do that often. It is a pretty decent way of being able to edit your photos if you need to on the back of the camera. And while I found it a little bit clumsy to use with my big fingers, actually once you get into it and once you get going, you can do all of your kind of global adjustments, your exposure, your contrast, highlight, shadows, clarity, and then your color, various things like that. And then you can go in, do your graduated filters, radial filters, whatever it is you like to do, and you're away. I think for me, this would work best for something like street photography, where I might want to apply a certain style to it. So some sort of contrast boost, maybe pop it in black and white, anything like that. Absolutely. And then you could pop it on Instagram if you wanted to. For the most part, as much as I totally applaud the innovation here, I just wouldn't want to edit my photos this way. I want to see them on the big screen. You know, I'm taking 37 megapixel photos. I want to take them back and put them on my computer, and I want to edit them kind of properly in my own time and stuff like that. I'm not in such a rush to edit them on the camera post to Instagram. That's just not my lifestyle, I guess. But for people who do want to snap a quick edit and pop it on Instagram, you definitely could do that with this camera. You can do a more extensive edit, definitely. I just think that if you're doing a more extensive edit, it might be better doing that on the computer. Otherwise, it is actually very impressive how good the screen looks and how much you're able to do just on that screen without it feeling horrible. You know, like I say, my fingers are a bit big, so it's a little bit clumsy, but actually, it's surprising how well it works. Something I would note while we're talking about this is because it's an Android system, because the whole thing needs to boot up when you turn on the camera, this is not the kind of camera to capture a very quick moment happening if you happen to notice it and you go to turn on the camera. It's not super quick to start up. You do get some nice, incredibly smooth animations when you turn it on, but if you're noticing something happening, this is not the kind of camera where you just, oh, on, snap. That's just not how it's gonna work. It's gonna boot up the Android operating system, and then you're gonna be able to take the photo. But it's not, you know, instant like that. That was a terrible click. It's not instant like that.
Hey guys, Gareth here, just editing the video, and what I want to say actually, just about the starting up of the camera, is that I did actually notice as I was going around shooting, after I actually filmed this bit again, I went out to shoot some more photos, I did notice that actually it is able to kind of go into a sleep mode, so I was actually not turning the camera fully off between locations, so we finish in one location, pop the camera in the bag, drive to the next one, and I noticed that actually by doing that, it did switch on pretty much like that. So that's probably worth noting, because once I started doing it like that, once I started using it like that, if I knew I might want to take a photo at any moment, I would just leave it in that kind of sleep mode where I just, if you don't use it, the screen will go off and that sort of thing. And it didn't seem to run the battery down too badly at all. So worth being aware of.
Now we've talked about the screen, but of course we've got the viewfinder as well, which looks really decent actually as well. So out and about, bright sunny day, taking portraits, landscape, in shade, yes, but also in bright sun. The screen was nice and bright. The viewfinder was really nice as well. I actually really like it. It doesn't have an eye cup or anything like that because it's trying to keep it kind of, you know, sleek and minimalist on the back. And this is the kind of camera you could pop in your, in your bag without maybe having to have a camera bag. So it doesn't have an eye cup on there, but it does actually look decent, the viewfinder. I was using the screen a lot just because there's no eye cup. It feels like the kind of camera where you maybe would use the screen, but actually for portraits and stuff like that, I was going in with the viewfinder. Now, talking of portraits, let's talk about the autofocus a little bit. Now, I didn't have any issues. I didn't have any problems with it. It was pretty reliable. It was decent, but there isn't any eye autofocus. There's face detection, but there's no eye autofocus. Some of you may not mind that at all. Some of you may definitely mind that, especially given that we've probably become relatively used to having eye autofocus these days in our cameras. It's everywhere, right? And it's very good everywhere. It's even on phones and stuff like that. So the lack of that is a bit of a shame, but there is face detection, which is handy. And actually, I suppose, to be fair, 35mm f2, it's not so fast that you've got a crazy depth of field that maybe the eye will be in focus and just behind is out of focus. You probably maybe don't need eye detection. Face detection is probably enough. It's just surprising not to see it in a camera of this kind of stature, because obviously Zeiss are going for a very high-end market here with this camera. We can't not talk about the price. I don't normally talk about price in videos, but I don't think we can ignore it. You know, you can check the link down in the description to go and check the current price, because of course, depending on when you're watching this, things change, obviously. But at the time of recording this, it's about £5,300, something like that, £5,400. I'd have to double check actually, but it'll be down in the description to go and check the link. But that's not cheap, you know, especially when you're considering this is a fixed lens. This is an all-in-one, you know, yes, it's full frame, yes, it's fantastic, and the Lightroom stuff is great, and it's a lovely, beautiful camera. Does it feel super high-end and premium? Absolutely. This has an incredibly nice weight to it. The grip it's very cleverly designed in the way it kind of sticks out to make it comfortable, but then the actual screen becomes a part of it. It's a really nice system that I like, with the thumb on the back as well. I really, really like that. You know, that then very naturally feels good when you then touch and drag to move the focus point as well. But yeah, it's a very premium product and it feels that way as well. And you can absolutely get some beautiful images from it as well. But obviously then there's the trade-off of that price point. So that's a personal thing. Is that worth it to you? Is it the kind of thing you want to go for? It's also worth mentioning this does not have a lot of connections on it. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's one USB-C port on the side, nothing for video, which is completely understandable. This is not aimed at videographers, I don't think. This is absolutely for photography. But there's one USB-C port, and I get it. The idea is to keep things minimalist and sleek, but it's not even covered. So the idea, I guess, is not to have flaps and stuff on there to ruin this kind of one-piece design, but it does probably compromise the weather resistance a little bit, which means taking this out in the rain or adverse weather conditions, probably not going to be ideal. Now, this is obviously the ZX1, and it really does feel like the first in a generation of cameras. There's a lot of new ideas, a lot of innovation, a lot of trying stuff out, and probably future cameras will iron things out and maybe get things, you know, finessed to where they need to be. I think it's a really interesting camera. I think there's a lot of great ideas, actually, a lot of interesting stuff that Zeiss are trying with this, and it certainly feels like a very premium camera, and you can get some lovely images out of it. Whether this is for you will depend on a lot of things, you know, including that price point as well, which I think is a big factor to consider with a camera like this. But I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments. You know, would you use Lightroom on the camera? Because for me, I'd probably go home and use it on the computer. I'd probably prefer to do that, apart from in specific situations. I'd love to hear everything down in the comments, so pop it all down there. Any questions, of course, pop them down there as well. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. That really helps me out. Of course, subscribe as well for more stuff all the time. I'll see you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.